Lainey Spicer.
Yes, she's terrific.
She
Really,
is.
she's very, very bright and very knowledgeable and was very receptive because I give Roger a chance to say what he wants to say. There's always a question that's raised among people in the criminal law world whether you should ever let your client talk at all. The wisdom, if you want to call it that, is generally don't let them say anything about anything because they're going to say something inconsistent that's going to be used against them if it ever goes to trial. And that's the traditional wisdom. But I can understand Roger's view on this too. He feels that he's got a First Amendment right to say what he believes and what he thinks things are, and he's going to make a comment.
He's been saying it all along. That
he's consistent.
He said he had nothing to do with WikiLeaks, the leak, and all that, and he hasn't colluded with any of them. So
well, I'm going to talk about that before we start, because the interview is going to take place at 4:30. I thought we should tell people who have not heard the show before what the show is really all about.
Tell us, Judge.
I need very little encouragement. There's really like 4 reasons. 4 reasons. Reason number 1 is to provide information to the public. The public really sees the legal profession and what goes on in the legal world from a very narrow perspective, what they've seen on television, or read in the books, or saw in the movies.
Or what they dealt with personally, too.
And many people could tell you horrible stories about their exposures in the legal system. So we want to provide you information. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me first, not in an ego sense, but just to give you a sense of where I'm coming from.
How tall are you, Judge?
Not enough. And I'm not getting any taller. That's the problem.
Well, that's okay.
But I went to the doctor to be measured. I was a half an inch shorter.
That sucks.
I can't keep coming back here.
Right.
But the bottom line really is I started after law school as basically entertainment and ended up in that business as a business affairs executive. But I went into the district attorney's office because I wanted to be a prosecutor. So I did. And I enjoyed my stay there at the district attorney's office and gave me great experience and foundation for the future. Came out and have practiced civil and criminal litigation
Let me ask you a question.
more than 50 years.
Why did you leave? First of all, why did you want to become a prosecutor?
I'd been tangentially involved in law enforcement when I was going through law school. I had a job in internal security for a big corporation.
Okay, so you lean that way.
And I kind of was on the more aggressive side. The public defenders generally are much more caring, concerned. Those days I wasn't caring, concerned. I was going to do this, so I did.
Okay.
And in the civil law, I practiced mainly doing plaintiff's work, representing parties against major entities usually. And in the criminal defense, I did everything from streetwalkers, bookmakers, and I had 2 murder cases even, actually, rape and murder cases. I gave the crimes of violence defenses up after a while. I think I told a story about the guy that I was representing who was accused of raping 23 women.
Yeah, you did say something.
And he was one cuckoo.
Yeah.
And I would sit at the table with him. He was dressed in his jumpsuit, in the shack. They shackled him arms and legs. This was for the preliminary hearing. And when the women were testifying, he'd lean over to me and he'd say things like, she loved it and all that. And I said to myself, I went home that night and I said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, that'd be disturbing.
I said, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of white-collar criminal stuff, mostly insurance fraud, things like that.
Did a lot of arson.
So arson, yes, a lot of arson cases. Tied in a lot of times with insurance fraud claims. So I did that for a long time, and I had a real good opportunity to see what the criminal law was like from the inside. In 2008, I was appointed by then presiding Judge Stephen Zuliger to the Superior Court pro tem, meaning I was serving for about a 3-year period on a basis where they would call me and they would send me to play. I covered 15 courts over about 8 years. I was going to Long Beach and Pasadena and Inglewood, wherever it was that they needed somebody. I was the guy on the bench, the sixth player, so to speak.
Was it small claims or?
No, I did 4 different things. I did small claims, and I was qualified or certified for all these subjects. I did what they call landlord-tenant, evictions and things like that. I did restraining orders for about 6 years, 5, 6 years. And I did general civil litigation, which meant what they call law in motion, deciding constitutional issues, things like, real lawyering. And so I did that for all that period of time and got a real good sense of how it worked. Got to know a lot of the people in the system, the court personnel, the other judges and whatever. So I decided I was going to write a book. And I was going to talk about what it's like to navigate through the legal system and also finding a spiritual path along the way. So the second reason for the show, in addition to providing information for people who just want information, just want to learn what the system is like, they might be in it one day and they want to have a little preparation for it. Then the second phase really is to provide guidelines to people. I don't give any legal advice, but I will tell you that this is what you generally should do procedurally and how do you go about it, how do you pick a lawyer, who are the judges, what can you expect, and things of that nature. What if you get arrested and it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're sitting in the can? What do you do about it?
It really sucks. I can say that.
The food is awful. I got to tell you, the food is awful.
Yes, it is. Those cheese sandwiches are no good.
I used to when I was in the DA's office, we used to go to the jails, and interview people and stuff like that. So I saw what the jails were like from the inside. I actually was in one of the state prisons. You heard that story before. I got locked in by mistake.
Yeah.
Not by mistake. I got locked in there.
They had a riot or something.
They had a riot, and they put me in this thing, and there's bars on both sides. So anyway, that's a prelude to what we're going to do with Roger today. I'm going to talk about his criminal case. How far will he be willing to go? I don't know. But I'm going to ask him a lot of questions about what's going on. I've read the indictment. And before we start, I thought what I should do for those people who are not really familiar with the terms that go along in the criminal law, I kind of give you a layman's deposition. I said depositions.
Definitions. Okay.
Definitions of some of the terms that you're going to hear. Either you hear it on the show, or you hear it in the news, or you watch it on CNN.
Yeah, lay out what's they're charging Stone with.
Well, and I'm sure Roger's going to say so. I don't think I have to encourage him to say it.
No, but I mean, for people that don't know what's going to happen or what's going on.
I read the indictment, as I just said. I don't think much of it.
Really?
And right after the break, I'll tell you why I think the prosecution's got a long, hard road to go. Roger's got some decent defenses, which we're going to talk about before he's on, and then I'll talk to him about it when he gets on the phone with us.
All right, cool. And you get the Judge's book, From the Trench to the Bench, on Amazon.com. We'll be back with the Judge right after this.
1050 AM, KCAA.
Herb Dodell is a lawyer and a judge for the people. Having served as a Superior Court judge, presiding over more than 9,000 cases, he has witnessed firsthand how complicated and corrupt the legal system can be. His goal is to show how things really work in the legal system, so that people can navigate the legal system in the best way for them. Many people often feel marginalized by the legal system and are uninformed about how to proceed when unfortunate circumstances arise in their life. Judge Herb will pull back the curtain, lift the veil, so people can truly understand their rights, have access to top legal personnel that they can trust, and have knowledge about how things work so they can make better choices. Judge Herb isn't just knowledgeable. His integrity and spiritual values are truly what make him different. He cares about democratizing access and information for all and desires to turn on the light so the people, you, can benefit. For more information, email the judge at askjudgeherb@gmail.com. That's askjudgeherb@gmail.com.
Okay, we're going to get to 3 and 4. Three is we use real cases on the show, in the book, because they are illustrations as to what happened to somebody else. That means if it happened to somebody else, it can happen to you. And so I have found over the years that litigation is very, very stressful for the litigants and for the lawyers too, actually.
Absolutely.
And because I know your father used to work till midnight on some of his cases.
Oh, my dad would get up at like 7 in the morning, go down to, I lived in Westlake Village, go down to court, down on Hill Street, spend all day down there, go to his office in Beverly Hills or here across the street, actually in Encino when he moved over here, get home and work all night until like midnight. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, it was just, I really have a lot of respect for lawyers. I think people do not understand how hard you guys work.
On that, I agree. I used to work till 2 o'clock in the morning almost every day.
Yeah.
And I would talk to the lawyers who were working with me on the phone, 1:30, quarter to 2, 2 o'clock. You know, it was a very long, long day, especially when you're in trial.
Oh, yeah.
When you're in trial, everything else stops.
And the other thing is the paperwork. I mean, I don't know.
Tons.
I don't know about now, but tons. His whole, like, he used to like do a lot of his work on his bed. You know what I mean? And his whole bed would be covered with files and stuff. I'm like, Dad. I mean, and then he just ended up passing out. He was so damn tired.
Oh,
I
can absolutely relate to that. But see, criminal law is different than the civil law.
Yeah, he was a criminal attorney.
Criminal lawyers generally don't have as much paper, unless you're dealing with white collar crime.
He did have a lot. I don't know if it was files or whatever, but he did. He was always on the yellow legal pads all over the place. And
now, the standard criminal cases, you know, robbery, burglary, those things, very little paper involved.
Okay, well,
I mean, you read some reports here and there, but not a whole lot.
He did murder cases though.
Well,
he had
it
a
was
few
long.
murder cases and robbery.
Hard work. So number 3 really is to give you real case illustrations. Some of them are pretty entertaining, actually. Small claims court especially, and restraining orders. I've heard stories. One lady came in and said, I want a restraining order because she has x-ray vision and she knows what I'm thinking and what she's saying. And she went on and on and on, and I'm nodding my head just being polite. But you get all kinds of crazy cases in restraining order court. And that's why there's so many of them. I put them into the book.
Yeah.
And the fourth one is the spiritual twist, because most people are going through these experiences are living lives of chaos. They are stressed out, they're uncertain, they're fearful, they don't know where they're going, and all of that. And so they really are living a very difficult life. So if you follow the practical spiritual tools that are universal, not religious, but universal spiritual tools like cause and effect and some of those other principles, you can change chaos into order and fulfillment if you know how to do it. And it's not very hard. It's just called doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And so we combine those 4 elements into making the show possible for everybody. Educational, informational, practical, spiritual, and all those wrapped into one. So let's go back to the definitions. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Everybody has heard that expression. It's a burden of proof is what it is. It means that the prosecution in every single criminal case, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, now misdemeanors, the general differentiation is they're defined as such in the statutes. But for misdemeanors, it's usually a sentence of up to 1 year in the county jail and a fine or both. Felonies, far more serious. Felonies begin with a year and the fine or both. And where you're incarcerated makes a big difference. In the misdemeanor convictions, they're generally in like the county farm or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like that kind of facility.
Or you get community service, or
big difference. Big difference.
Yeah, you don't get community service when you get convicted of a felony.
Felony, you go into the joint.
Yeah.
The joint is what we call it. That's the jail. That's prison. There's a big difference between the county jail and state prison. I can assure you of that. So felonies are far more serious. So what is the standard that's required? Beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that mean? Does it mean if you have any doubt at all whatsoever, the defendant has got to be acquitted? Because keep in mind, every defendant in this country is cloaked with what's called the presumption of innocence. You don't have to prove anything if you're the defendant. In fact, if you look at Manafort's trial not too long ago, they put on no defense. And people would say, well, how could you not put on a defense? Well, it makes sense sometimes when you haven't got one.
Right.
Number one. But number two, you're holding the prosecution to the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
So what's reasonable doubt? What the reasonable person, that's what a juror is, what a reasonable person believes is more likely by a much higher standard than just more likely. Convincingly is probably a better word.
That's a good word.
And convincingly that the defendant did what they were accused of doing. Sometimes you have direct evidence and sometimes you have circumstantial evidence. What's the difference? We've mentioned it several times on the shows. Direct evidence is something that you can see, that you can feel, you can touch. It's a document. It's something material. An inference, and we're going to talk to Roger about that. An inference is something you have to draw a conclusion from something that already exists but is not directly on point as to that particular issue. And that's what this case against Stone is really going to be about, circumstantial evidence. Right. And, of course, we've already talked about what hearsay is. Hearsay is an out-of-court statement made and being offered for the truth of the matter when the person who supposedly did or said something is not in court to be cross-examined.
That's what it sounds like with Stone's case, too.
Oh, I want to talk about that. I'm absolutely going to talk, because one of the first things that jumped out at me was when I was reading the foundation, the basis for the complaints against him, and we'll talk about that, was didn't seem to me to have sufficient foundation to be believable beyond a reasonable doubt. And so my conclusion so far, and keep in mind with this caveat, I don't know what Mueller has, number one.
Right.
Number two, I don't know what a lot of the theories are that are going into it that have never been disclosed, so I don't know that either. But all I do know is if you looked at it today, with what you know from what's been publicized, that has some degree of credibility, it don't meet the smell test, to me. It's not anything that I could see. It's beyond any reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
That's personal opinion.
Well, just like you said, we really don't know what's behind the curtain, as they say.
I got a pretty good feeling.
I'm just saying we don't know as a society what the Mueller investigation really has. The guy has kept it so quiet that it's amazing that there hasn't been more leaks or anything like that.
That is kind of surprising. But the fact of the matter is that there's been no published evidence. And I say evidence has to be what's called admissible evidence. Evidence could be the existence of something, but it doesn't get into evidence in a trial because it violates one of the rules of evidence. And there's a big body called evidence. Books are written on evidence. You take a whole course on evidence, what's admissible, what's not admissible. To get a conviction, it has to be based on admissible evidence. If the court sustains an objection or strikes anything, the jury cannot consider it. And sometimes they're not left with a whole lot to think about because stuff has been eliminated. Now, with Roger's case, there's, as I see it, without knowing more, again, I'm just kind of feeling my way through this, there's 4 potential defenses.
Yeah.
Good ones.
Really?
I think so. I really do think so.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into more details with Roger because he has more familiarity with it. I'm sure he's probably read it more than I have. But circumstantial evidence and direct evidence are a significant input and consideration in any case.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of hearsay. Like they're saying, well, he did this, and this guy's telling, his cohort or whatever. The one guy sort of ratting him out, saying that Stone talked to WikiLeaks and Julia Assange, and then they talked to the Trump campaign, and it's all, everybody's just sort of talking. There's no like you said, physical evidence of it that we know of, anyways.
Even if there was, there's still some issues that have to be addressed from the legal side, not only from the factual side, but from the legal side. Now, it all starts with an indictment. People say, "Oh, I've heard that term. What does that really mean?" Well, an indictment is different. There are two basic ways that a person can be charged as a criminal, becomes a defendant. One is usually by what's called an information. An information is basically prepared by the district attorney or the city attorney or whoever has jurisdiction over the case. They prepare the equivalent of a criminal complaint. It's oftentimes referred to as a complaint, as a matter of fact. And so when a person is arrested in state court on a claim where there is only a complaint, the defendant is entitled to something called a preliminary hearing. I remember when I was a DA, I'd do like 7, 8 preliminary hearings a day.
Yeah.
They'd hand you the files, go in there and do it. You put the cop on the stand, he testifies, and he can use hearsay in California in preliminary hearings. And they'll come up there, they'll say whatever it is, and it's 20 minutes, and it's found to answer. Client is held to an arraignment in the higher court and is set for trial. Right. That's the way that works. The second way is called an indictment. An indictment is generally a process where there's a body called the grand jury. The grand jury.
Who is the grand jury?
The grand jury are citizens who end up sitting there for 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is.
They get paid?
I'm sure they get paid. Jurors get paid.
Well, I mean,
I wouldn't call it they get overwhelmingly paid, but they get paid.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, jurors, like hearing.
Look, you can't make a living being a grand juror.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Put it that way. You got a lot of people who are retired or don't need to work or
don't have anything else to do.
You're going to be there. You're going to be there every day
oh my
for
God.
a long time.
Nightmare.
But what distinguishes the grand jury from the other process is that the grand jury is secret.
Yeah.
And not only is it secret, but they have powers of subpoena. They'll bring in witnesses who have to testify before the grand jury, right?
And it's only the district attorney, too.
Only the prosecutor.
Yeah, right. Or
no lawyers permitted.
Right.
Because I think I told the story maybe even last week or the week before that I was the lawyer for a movie called Deep Throat, believe it or not. I was representing the distributor in that case. It was an issue of whether or not they were distributing over state lines. Which those days was considered pornography was against the law.
Right. Federal offense.
It was before some of the big cases that came down on the subject. And I went down there with the client, and he went in. He was instructed to do one thing. What do you think that was, Gary?
Keep his mouth shut.
No, he couldn't keep his mouth shut. But when he opened his mouth, what was he supposed to say?
Not guilty.
No? What do you think he was going to say?
I don't know, Judge.
Fifth Amendment.
Oh, Fifth Amendment.
Fifth Amendment.
Right. Okay.
I can't answer that question. And everybody understands. We'll even review the Fifth Amendment briefly right after the break.
I choked on that one.
Well.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll be back after this.
NBC Talk Radio, 1050 AM, KCAA.
In his book, From the Trench to the Bench, Judge Herb Dodell demystifies the legal system, including both civil and criminal, the lawyers, the judges, and the process. As a judge, former deputy district attorney, and criminal defense attorney, he knows the legal system. He has the inside information that you need to pick a lawyer, and he's here to give it to you. No matter what you're facing that makes you think you may need a lawyer, Judge Herb will shed valuable light on your situation and reveal your best options and many secrets of how the judicial system actually works. To find out more about how the legal system really works, you can get your copy of Judge Herb Dodell's eye-opening book, From the Trench to the Bench, at Amazon.com.
Well, good afternoon, Roger. Can you hear me?
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing under these trying circumstances?
Well, I'm in good spirits. This is not unexpected. I think I have predicted for some time that I might be framed for some political crime that I did not commit, and that is the case. I would point out to you that I am facing a series of nonviolent process crimes. No Russian collusion, no WikiLeaks collaboration, no conspiracy, no receipt of allegedly hacked or allegedly stolen emails. These are essentially process crimes. And as you know, I entered a not guilty plea, and I intend to fight for vindication.
Well, it's interesting. Just before we got on with you, I was defining for the public what an indictment is and differentiating between an indictment and a criminal complaint. And I mentioned to Gary before we got on the air, and even I think in one of the previous times we were talking about the subject, I read the indictment. I used to be a prosecutor, as well as being a criminal defense lawyer for many, many, many years. So I've seen documents like this often. And frankly, I'm not impressed. I think this indictment leaves a whole lot to be desired, and it doesn't tell you a whole lot, although I certainly don't know what they have, if they have anything. It certainly isn't going to be found in that indictment. And I got to tell you that perjury, which is 5 of the 7 counts, is a very difficult case to prove for a lot of reasons. In fact, in all the years that I was practicing, one way or the other, I don't think I ever saw a perjury case. So I know from looking at the indictment and looking at the facts that are available to the public that this one's pretty short. So what do you think about that?
Well, obviously, we don't have enough time to totally adjudicate my case here, other than to say that my comments and actions are decontextualized in a way that only I can understand, and that perjury, as you know, requires both intent and materiality, which is kind of ironic because James Comey, Andrew McCabe, James Clapper, John Brennan, Huma Abedin, Cheryl Mills, Rod Rosenstein, Christopher Wray himself, the FBI director, and of course Hillary Clinton, all lied to both investigators or Congress, but none of them have had 29 heavily armed FBI agents storm their home. I mean, the irony of that, of course, is that the special counsel is well aware that I'm represented. I don't have a valid passport. I don't own a gun. Thanks to CNN and MSNBC, I have one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. I predicted for 2 years that I could be indicted. There is no evidence that I was planning to destroy or tamper with evidence. I've destroyed and tampered with nothing. If I were going to do so, why would I wait till last Friday?
Yeah.
But I have destroyed nothing. So this was, I think, to poison the potential jury pool, to hold me up to ridicule, to depict me as a violent criminal, which I am not. And that was kind of proven by the fact that the magistrate gave me a surety bond. I essentially was released on my signature without posting a cash bond, which kind of indicates that the court does not believe me to be a flight risk. It was for show. It's hard to believe that these kind of Gestapo tactics exist in the United States, but I think it has not played well with the American people. I mean, never mind me terrorizing my 73-year-old wife, who's hearing impaired, who woke up only when 2 armed FBI agents burst into her bedroom, or our bedroom, I should say. It is really repugnant to, I think, a lot of the American people.
Yeah, Mr. Stone.
And then add on top of that, the fact that a CNN crew was allowed to film the whole thing, that raises a lot of serious questions.
Yeah, Mr. Stone, I just want to say that, if you wanted to get rid of evidence, you could have got rid of evidence many, many months ago. It wasn't like you were holding out there. And for them to crash in with 29 FBI agents, you're right, absolutely right. The American people find that sort of disgusting. That was not cool.
Well, the real question is, why are they doing all this? And I'm going to ask you that question in a second. But I must tell you that when clients of mine were about to be arrested, and they knew who I was, and I was representing somebody, they would call me and say, "Okay, bring him in," and I would surrender them. Number one, I'd have a bail bondsman there at the same time, so that if the court decided at that moment to set a bail amount, we were able to do that. And we oftentimes, in fact, I've done it myself, I've walked with the client as they get processed. You know, you get the picture taken and the fingerprints and all of that. And it's usually pretty civil, unless you've got some wild, crazy racketeer murderer out there, that then the system changes. But for somebody like you, I think that they overplayed this thing dramatically. And the question is, why are they doing this to you?
Well, perhaps it's because I've been a friend of Donald Trump's for 40 years. Perhaps it's because I have been an outspoken critic of Clinton's and President Obama. Perhaps it's because I have a 40-year record of defeating liberal Democrats in elections. I think this is payback without any question. I do think this is a politically motivated prosecution. I mean, the lead prosecutor in my case worked at the Hillary Clinton State Department, and his emails were among those emails published by WikiLeaks. The other lead prosecutor was a woman attorney who represented Hillary Clinton in the email server case, as well as representing the Clinton Foundation in a racketeering case. Those are the email issues, one of the things on which I have been investigated, although no charges were brought because I have no knowledge or receipt of any stolen emails. But those seem to me to be obvious conflicts of interest, and those are things that ultimately I think will have to be decided by the courts. Again, I think the idea here was to depict me as guilty before I could prove my innocence, to create this public image like I'm public enemy number one. I mean, they used more men to arrest me than they used to take down bin Laden.
That's true.
I don't think I could respond to that, but the reality is that they've made a big deal out of this. We're talking about trying cases in the press. That happens all the time. The prosecution and people around them oftentimes portray the defendant as a horrible person, et cetera, just as you said. But the defendants, on the other hand, are trying to do their bit at the same time to convince the public that there's really nothing to any of this and that they're not guilty of anything, never were guilty of anything. And so that's why they have what's called a gag order. And one of the things we were talking about last week was whether or not you would ever be able to speak at all and exercise your First Amendment rights to express your opinion, or whether some judge was going to put a gag on you. And there is no gag order. That's why you're on the show today. The reality is I'm interested, and I think the public is interested in, other than the fact that you were friends with Donald Trump for 40 years, why do you think that they're after you personally?
Well, first let me address the gag order question. The judge said that she was considering imposing a gag order. My lawyers filed papers opposing that. The government, of course, favors that. We'll see what she decides. Of course, that decision is subject to appeal. I will obviously adhere to any order of the court. Also, I think the special counsel engaged in some judge shopping here. I'm in front of the same judge who tried Paul Manafort and incarcerated him before he was convicted of a crime, because they claim that this is a related case. My attorneys also filed a challenge to that. So there are a lot of procedural issues here. I don't really understand how you can have your First Amendment rights abridged. There's a famous case in which Jay Leno had such an order, which he defeated in the federal courts. Again, I think the reason they want to gag me is twofold. One, they don't want me to be able to defend myself. But more importantly, they don't want me to be able to raise the money for a legal defense. I've asked people who support me to go to stonedefensefund.com, which goes strictly to pay my legal expenses, or to raise more money to pay my legal expenses. This is not money I am putting in my pocket. But the federal government has an unlimited budget with which to prosecute me. They have 4 platoons of Ivy League prosecutors. I have to pay for every penny. Good lawyers are not inexpensive, as you know. I have 4 excellent lawyers, and they're very aggressive, but they need to be paid. In December, I lost my health and life insurance because I could no longer pay the premiums. The insidious 2 years of leaking by the special counsel, predicting week after week after week that I would be indicted for treason or Russian collusion, which of course never happened, has dried up my personal business and my book sales, my speech opportunities. So this has put me under an enormous personal financial strain, which is exactly the idea. We saw with General Mike Flynn that he ultimately pled guilty to a crime I don't think he committed because he just didn't have the resources to fight, which is why I ask people to go to stonedefensefund.com and why I have to direct my lawyers to try to oppose the gag, because part of the reason they want to gag me is so I cannot raise the money for a vigorous legal defense.
That's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought of that. But you mentioned a couple of things about requirements for a successful prosecution. And when I looked at the indictment and analyzed it for myself, I said, I think some of these elements they may not be able to make. First of all, materiality is an essential ingredient. And if it turns out that there really was no crime committed in terms of the Russians, then many of the things that they claim will no longer be material. At least an argument could be made that way, and whether or not a judge would accept it or not remains to be seen. And that depends on who your judge is. There are certain judges that lean to the material, certain judges that lean toward the liberal, certain judges that lean toward the conservative. It depends on who you get. Now, I don't know anything about Judge Jackson. She's a federal district court judge, so therefore they come clothed with a lot of power that state court judges don't necessarily have, at least perceptually they don't. I think materiality is a big problem for the prosecution in this case. Looking at the 5 counts for perjury, I'm not so sure that there's any direct evidence to support any of it. The real question is whether or not inferences could be drawn from circumstantial evidence, people saying and doing things. And then they run into the evidentiary problem of hearsay and credibility. These are 2 essential elements in any litigation. The credibility of Corsi and Credico remains to be seen, but there's certainly a lot of holes in what they've been saying, and that's about impeachment. And that goes to the issue of materiality. It goes to the question of whether or not they've met the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And then there's the intent. They have to prove that you had the intent to commit perjury and that you weren't negligent. And then you may even have constitutional rights dealing with search and seizure issues. So from what we can see, the public right now, there's nothing really to support what it is that they're claiming in these indictments. And I take no positions. I just look at it analytically, and I think you got a shot, Roger. I think you got a shot.
Well, obviously, I'm not going to address any of that in this forum, but you have some shrewd observations. Beyond that, my intention is to fight. If I can raise the resources, it is a daunting process. I also would go to trial in the District of Columbia, which voted some 90% for Hillary Clinton. It will be, I'm a conservative Republican. I think everybody knows that, of the libertarian stripe. Whether I can get a fair trial remains to be seen. But this idea that my defending myself taints the jury pool with the government's leaks or the government's, overpowering Gestapo type raid on my home doesn't taint the jury pool. I'm not sure how that works. So we shall see. I mean, one day at a time. I'm supported by a great family and a great wife, and literally at this point, thousands of Americans who have contributed to my legal defense fund and who are praying for me. And I'm a fighter by nature. I kind of believe that a man is not defeated or a man is not finished when he's defeated. He's only finished when he quits, as Richard Nixon said. And I don't intend to quit.
Well, do you think that maybe one of the reasons for filing against you and obtaining the indictment against you was the hope that you would then provide them with a link between Trump and the Russians?
Well, I would have to perjure myself in order to conjure something like that up. So I'm not willing to do that. I've made very clear that I'm not going to make up stories, that I will testify truthfully as to everything that transpired, and that is my position. I'm not going to bear false witness against Donald Trump in order to ease the pressures on myself. So that's going nowhere because I think lying makes things worse. I'm not going to perjure myself. I haven't so far. Now, it's interesting because in my hearing before the House Intelligence Committee, there was a lot of lying going on. Congressman Adam Schiff, for example, said, oh, no, the FBI did inspect the DNC's email servers. That was false. Congressman Eric Swalwell said, oh, on August 21st, this is the first time you ever mentioned John Podesta in a tweet. No, that's actually not true. But they hide behind their congressional immunity. They've been cheerleading for my indictment based on some false claim that I was less than truthful before the committee. I wouldn't be shocked if both of them are called as witnesses in this trial, as well as some of the Republican members. Let's see what they thought about the materiality of my comments.
Well, that's certainly interesting. That's an interesting twist. I've never heard that one before.
That would be pretty wild.
Look, you have constitutional issues here, no question. I haven't researched the question of gag orders before. I haven't in many years, if I ever did. But the fact of the matter is, there's the same balancing act between freedom of speech and allowing yourself to represent yourself in the public versus the government's right to basically keep you quiet. And that's what a gag order is. And so I suppose that is an appellate issue that'll come down the road if the gag order is ultimately issued. And that would mean that you can't come on the show for a while. I mean, and I kind of missed the dialogue, if you want to know.
We shall see.
Well, I got to tell you, I loved your book. I really did love your book because I see all these great parallels and the way things have worked over the last 20 years. Where do you think we're going with all this? This unity in the country right now? Where do you say? I've heard you talk about people all in this together and the fact that everybody's got their own same self-interest and everything else. You think it's going to change very much now?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, the death threats against me and my family reached a crescendo right after my indictment. I'm receiving hate mail because my address has now been widely publicized. People are ringing the bell and so on, all hours of the day and night. People driving by the house to take pictures and so on. Threats against my children, my grandchildren, even my dogs. One threat to disfigure my wife. There's a lot of sick human beings out there.
That's really sick.
I mean, I feel passionately about politics, but I've never threatened violence against a political opponent. And in the day, I had many, many friends who were Democrats or even liberals or progressives who we would enjoy debating, drinking, eating, hanging out. It is, those days are gone.
That's sad.
This hearing in which the House Democrats assaulted the acting attorney general was beyond anything I've ever seen. There was no comity. There was no congeniality. There was no respect. This yes or no, Mr. Attorney General, yes or no. Well, please give me a break.
What do you think about the Congress? Roger, what do you think about the Congress right now? I
think you just said it.
No, I'm not talking about the House Investigation Committee. You know, I mentioned to you before I have a fraternity brother who's a U.S. Senator, and I think he's a wonderful human being in it for all the right reasons. And so I'm interested in what you think about the rest of the people that are sitting in our Congress. Think they're all...
Well, I mean, I don't think, again, I think there are some very fine legislators, and I think there are some demagogues. And I've been pretty blunt about who's in which camp. But I don't think you can condemn the entire Congress, although it is interesting that if you read any of the respected public opinion research, you'd find that political institutions, politicians, Congress, both parties, all three branches of government are held in the lowest repute of any time in our past.
I agree.
People believe it's a rigged system, rigged against the little man, rigged against the common citizen, and they correctly believe that the special interests can essentially buy anything they want. They also believe that there are two systems of justice. I mean, Russian collusion. Bill and Hillary Clinton took $145 million from the Russian energy company for their phony charity. At the same time that 20% control of America's enriched uranium was on the table for transfer to the Russian-owned energy company. That seems to me to be a stunning, treasonous financial crime. Yet there is no investigation. There is no grand jury probing it. We know the Russian energy company was paying bribes to various American politicians, but the deal was allowed to go forward anyway. So there just seems to be two standards of justice. Terrific piece yesterday in The Hill yesterday by John Solomon makes a very good case for Russian collusion by Hillary Clinton's campaign. The fact that she laundered $300,000, calling it legal fees, when it really went to pay for the fabrication of the phony dossier, which accused Trump of falsely of sexual picadillo, shall we say, but was compiled with the assistance of Russian intelligence assets. And then that was used fraudulently by the Obama Justice Department to justify the surveillance on Donald Trump's campaign under the FISA Act. An American citizen can only be surveilled under a FISA warrant if they are actively involved in espionage on behalf of a foreign country against the United States of America.
Two quick questions.
Clearly,
just want to wrap up with two quick questions. If there was business that was being done between the Russians and the Trump campaign, do you think that that would rise to the level of some kind of illegality?
There's just no evidence that that happened. We have seen some evidence of Russian meddling in our election, but it is low-level, ham-handed, and fairly ineffective. No one even argues that it affected the turnout. There's a big difference between meddling and collusion. The meddling, at sometimes, was pro-Hillary, pro-Bernie Sanders. Other times, it was anti-Trump. So that's a completely different question than Russian collusion, which would be conspiracy or coordination between the Russian state and the Trump campaign. There is just no evidence of that. $40 million in 2 years in, we have no evidence of that whatsoever.
I got one last question. You think Trump's going to get reelected?
Well, I think he can get reelected. He has two major obstacles. One of them is the extraordinary internet-based censorship of conservatives and Republicans and libertarians and those who are pro-Trump, which is very real. Congressman Jerry Nadler calls it a right-wing conspiracy theory, but we've seen hard evidence of it, and it's problematic. The other thing is a need for ballot security. I don't understand why one does not require a picture ID to vote. We need one to get on an airplane. We need one to buy a pack of cigarettes. Why is it racist or discriminatory to require a photo ID to vote? In order to get the ID, you'd have to present proof of citizenship, but only citizens can vote. The process is way too porous. I think you had a record number of illegal and fraudulent votes cast in the last election. Those two things have to be solved for the president to get reelected.
Can I ask you one question, Mr. Stone? I forgot how to make a Nixon martini. Can you just tell the audience once again how do you do that Nixon martini?
Let me run you through that.
Thank you, sir.
Take a jar of olives, drain the juice, fill it with water, shake vigorously, drain the water. Fill it with dry vermouth, put it in the refrigerator, and let it chill. Take a glass, which you have let chill in the freezer, and let it sit there. Now get a silver or aluminum cocktail shaker. Fill it with ice. Pour in your preference, vodka or gin. Put the top on and shake very, very vigorously. If there are not tiny shards of ice on the surface when you pour, then you haven't shaken vigorously enough.
This is a unique show.
Pour into the chilled glass. Extract 2 martinis from the bottle of vermouth-filled olives, and you have the perfect martini. Now, Richard Nixon introduced me to that recipe, and I thought it was extraordinary. And he said, "Yeah, I got it from Winston Churchill."
Wow.
Well, we've got to say we have a unique show.
That's right.
We
I love you, Roger. I love you, Roger. I love you to death.
Next time we'll talk about how to cook a meal. Anyway, Roger, thank you very much. I know these are very trying times for you, and we all wish you well.
Thank you for calling in.
Thanks very much for participating in our show today.
And good luck. And it's stonedefensefund.com, stonedefensefund.com if you want to contribute to Mr. Stone's defense fund. God bless you.
And the book is great.
Great evening.
Thank you, sir.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, Roger.
All right. There you go. Mr. Roger Stone.
He certainly is an interesting character. I got to say that.
Well, I mean, I do believe he's telling the truth. I think he's not going to lie on the stand. I think what he says is he means. I mean, now, if the Mueller investigation has something else on him, then so be it. But I mean, he's sticking to his guns, and that's what I like about him. He tells it like it is. He's sticking to his guns, and he's, as far as we know, he's telling the truth.
He's going to take it to the end.
Absolutely, he's not going to bail out. He's not going to sell out like a Michael Flynn or a Manafort or the other guys. There's been so many of them that sold out. Cohen.
Yeah, but the other guys, they may have had a better case. They had a case against Cohen. They had a case against.
How do we know they don't have a case against Mr. Stone?
They may. They
That's what
absolutely
I'm saying.
may.
He's not going to sell out.
What's going to have to show up to make this case work? They're going to have to show some real collusion, and they're going to have to show there was conduct. All he's accused of doing is getting involved in the disclosure of the WikiLeaks.
Yeah,
that's it.
And perjury to the Congress.
Well, that's what they were talking to him about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That he perjured himself to Congress. That's one of the charges.
And there's a story in there that the obstruction of justice claim or count is that he threatened to somebody's dog. And you'll notice in the conversation today he was talking about his dog.
Yeah,
and he may have just been joking around with the other guy. They were friends. They knew each other. The sense of humor may have been whatever it was.
That's what he said.
But, you got to show an intent to obstruct somebody. And if you were just kidding around, that doesn't reach the level that's necessary to prove that element.
Yeah. Well, we're going to see what's going to happen. I mean, we'll know in the next few months, and it's going to be very interesting.
Yes, it will be very interesting. Even from a legal scholar standpoint, the way he's talking, there are going to be constitutional issues here. There's no question about it.
I can't believe he's got the same judge as Manafort did. Oh, that sucks. For him, anyways. That's why they're going to try to get rid of that judge. Right, Judge?
You know what the chances of, you know what the chances of that happening? Slim and none.
Well, I was going to say Slim just left.
And how do you think that judge is going to feel when you're trying to get rid of her?
Well,
how do you think she's going to feel the rest of the way of that trial?
She's going to be upset. She's going to just make every call against you.
Not if they're legitimate.
Oh, please. We know they're not.
You can't. Some guy tried to disqualify me one time, and it was untimely, so I denied it, right? And so how do you think they were feeling talking to me the rest of the way?
Probably not too good.
Not too good, but I was fair.
Were you really?
Absolutely.
You didn't have any bias at all?
None.
Okay. You're a better man than most.
Took a shot, but I didn't take it personally.
You're a better man than most, then.
Well,
there you go.
Whatever.
Listen, if you want to get the judge's book From the Trench to the Bench, go to Amazon.com. If you want to ask the judge a question, email him, askjudgeherb@gmail.com. Check out his YouTube videos. And also, Stone Defense Fund, stonedefensefund.com for Roger Stone's defense.
Okay, well, interesting show.
Can we go?
Yeah.
Thank you.
KCAA Loma Linda, 1050 AM, 106.5 FM.